I thought about talking with the Jedi for the pun, but I didn't want to force the issue. Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and I have brought my dude back. He is awesome. Here, let's give it up for MTV Jedi. MTV Jedi. That's awesome. Yeah, I know I'll keep that in. That's hilarious. It's MTG Jedi. Let's get this right. He is a Magic card geek, not a video geek, but he is an amazing dude. How you doing, my friend?
Oh yeah, really, really good. Super excited to be here and talk about these sweet topics today. I MTV Jedi. I'm gonna be thinking about laughing about that one all day. All right, let's jump right in.
All right. Yeah, you even have the MTV glasses. You know, you can use your ice column glasses as the MTV
Yeah,
glasses, and it actually fits pretty well.
yeah,
So,
for sure, for sure.
yeah, we are here. I brought another Faction Wars expert on there. We both love Faction Wars. It's some of the best content in the game. It's a lot of fun, and we're both running the Hell Hades free to play accounts, as I've got up here. So we are going to be talking about some of the early strategies that you can use to get yourself not only just extra stars, but get the extra resources. Because honestly, early on, while the stars are kind of important, it's nice to get those extra stars. The bigger reward early on is these forge materials, which we were talking about. And I actually have way too many of these things. I need to craft more stuff than I have been. I've been slacking on it. But those forge materials are a godsend for an early account, giving you both good gear, good high level gear, and very low investment.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. It's just a really easy way to progress your account that you might not think of at first. Also, 2.42 million silver. Come on, share the wealth.
Oh, I'm actually kind of low. I've been able to do a little bit better. And I will say that campaign farming is actually a lot more lucrative than I remember it being. It's, when you're in there grinding hundreds of those things, though, I guess it does add up.
Yeah.
So, hopping into Faction Wars here, I've actually had some luck. For example, I have my Orc Crypt here, which I don't have any keys, so I can't show you. But I've gotten fairly lucky with the Orcs. In fact, let's just go to my champions here and filter by orcs. I thank you, Polarium, for these filters, by the way. I can't thank you enough for how useful these things are. But here are the 4 orcs that have gotten me those 3 stars in everything through 13. And you might think, what are you talking about here? Well, that's probably my first big tip for this. Is if you look at the faction wars and check and see which ones you're either doing now or which ones you're going to be doing later. Simply training up some of your food in the proper factions gives you leveled champions, which will be better than unleveled champions. And you don't have to gear them necessarily, but a level 20 2-star champion is almost twice as tough as a level 1 20 2-star champion. So, I had Warboy, who was, I called him the MVP of this particular thing here, but I brought a Warboy, and Warboy at level 20 in 2 stars allowed me to 3-star every single one of those floors. And then I fed him,
Yeah.
thank you for your
Yep.
work. Go get eaten. Um, but that's, obviously that's a faction I've been lucky in. But, for the factions you're unlucky in, food champions can be extra flack for the champions you're going to actually go and use. In my dwarves, I've got a couple of decent champions and I have nobody else. If I had a couple of food dwarves, you bet I'd be throwing them in here and trying to 3-star a couple of these floors.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I love that early game. In addition to that, I like keeping one rare in each faction. It's hard to do that because you want to just use them as chickens. They're not like
Mm-hmm.
good champions, so you want to use them as your food. But keeping one rare in each faction just helps you complete that stupid quest.
Yep,
And
right here.
that's just free resources. So why not, you know? And then eventually you can find a rare that's actually decent so that you don't have to use the random ones. You could sacrifice it. But keeping one rare is, I think, a really important thing to do early on.
Yeah. Do you have any key on, like, if you're thinking of keeping one rare, ones to look out for specifically? Is there a specific type of thing you're looking for on them?
Your like HP support champions do tend to be better. Just whatever ones have better stats. But basically they're all gonna be kind of squishy. So I usually, if I'm gonna put gear on them, I just am looking for HP or defense percent, gloves, chest, and boots, just like crappy ones
Yeah.
that you can run at level 8, and that way even your rock tooth can be helpful. You
Yeah.
know, like it's not like he's a good champion, but like he's fine. I would prefer not attack based champions just because they tend to have the lowest stats, but you just use whatever you pull.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I like to look for, which I think is actually key for building a champion early, especially if it's the only champion you have in that particular faction, which can happen sometimes because especially if you're feeding a lot of these things, AoEs I find are super key because being able to do an AoE means you can clear a single wave possibly in one hit on level 1. It's not that hard. With a
Right,
champion you've maybe leveled up to 24 and thrown a bunch of +8 gear on.
right.
And that's so huge because not having to sit and, okay, I killed this one, attack, 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 attack. I killed this one, attack, attack, attack. I killed this one,
Yeah.
just really can wear you down.
Well, like that's one of the reasons why I like that uncommon in Lizardman,
Oh,
the farmable one.
yep. I know who you're talking about. It starts with an S. Saurus.
Yeah, Saurus. Yeah. He can technically be a campaign farmer. I don't recommend it because then you're six-starring a Saurus.
Hmm.
But like he has two AoEs. And like it's not a rare, so it won't do that quest. But those are the types of champions that can help you clear those levels early on.
Yeah. Another one to look out for the uncommon thing, of course, is Shield Guard. He's got the AoE right here and it fills his turn meter if it's critical hits. So if you actually can get
Yeah.
him to critical hit early, he can also be a campaign farmer. He can also be a Minotaur farmer, and then he removes debuffs as well. So you can look for champions like that. Again, those are AoEs, so that certainly helps.
Yeah.
I really do think the strength of AoEs helps a lot. And in fact, I can look at Ogrins, for example. I got an occult brawler recently, and I thought, oh, cool, he'll actually help me with faction wars. No, he
You know,
just
with all the single targets.
it's all single target. He poisons himself, which means he's kind of rough. You got to
Hmm.
really invest with him. Whereas Grimskin, a terrible champion, terrible,
So
but he's a
cool.
defense based champion that has an AoE.
Yeah.
So, in
Yeah.
fact, he's got a provoke too, which, not the best thing, but if, hey, I want to make sure I don't let somebody do this, I can get a chance to try this provoke, which actually I didn't even realize that he's got a provoke. I might actually drag him into Hydra next time.
There you go. Yeah. I
Uh,
think so for me, like when I'm on accounts all the time, I think after that first early game section where you're like using random food and random champions, like once you're getting into like level 60, level 70 area and you have like a real roster, I think the biggest thing that I notice consistently is people don't have a full team geared. They have whatever one or two champions they have built in each faction, but they never went like yeah, that brood lord.
mhm.
Like you have gear on him,
Yeah.
and that's going to help your lizardman team. Just gearing 5 champions with level 12 gear is going to help you 3-star, like maybe even all the way up to stage like 14, 15, 16.
Hmm.
You probably need to level them up past 3-star, and you probably need to think about some team compositions. But I think that do you agree like that you noticed that as well? People don't have all 5 champions geared?
I mean, I see that in the end game where people that don't have Lydia and are farming stage 13 and they only have like 3 champions geared and they're like, my champions are terrible. It's like, what do you mean your champions are terrible? You've got a pretty solid champion there. Well, he doesn't do anything. And I look and they've got like, 2 pieces of gear on them that are plus
Right.
4 or,
Right.
3-star gear because they haven't put anything else on. And yeah, it's, I'm looking here like Abyssal. He's actually got some good use, so he's actually a
Yeah.
good rare to use for a while. Diabolist, another one that's actually farmable, but actually highly useful, even early game arena if you're desperate for a speed booster, for example.
Right.
Um, and she's easy to farm because you're going to pick up tons of her at some point in time because you're farming 12-3 and she spawns out at 12-3. You notice I don't have the Hound person because the Hound person is also terrible, but so he just gets used as food. Diabolist, I've at least kept a Diabolist here or there.
Yeah.
And that's a good example too. I've got another one here that's 4 stars. I think I've got a 5-star one ready as a chicken somewhere. But if Demon Spawn comes up, I might not even throw gear on a 5-star Diabolist, but I'll at least throw her out there because she's going to tank several hits for you to keep the people
Yeah.
that have gear and stuff alive. And
Yeah.
then later
I like
on,
that sniper too as well.
yeah,
I'm in the
sniper.
process.
Oh,
No,
her,
yeah,
yeah.
the dark elf. I'm in the process of my food champions for dark elves right now are 4 snipers plus kale, so
Hmm.
that I can go 3-star all of those early stages
Yeah.
before until I can get more champions.
And here's the other thing too. You earn experience in Faction Wars. It's not a ton,
Yeah.
but even if you end up just throwing food in there, I'm not worried about the stars. I'm only going to 1-star this thing anyway. These guys are going to die. I might as well still throw 5 champions in there and get the experience for food because you only need
Yeah.
to 5-star it once. So you don't necessarily need to push for a 4-star, for example, because, hey, I've only got 4 champions. Let's make sure none of them die. No, you're going to have to rerun the thing once again. So I wouldn't even worry about a 4-star unless, say, you are absolutely 1-star short of getting one of these interesting rewards that's going to help you out. But for
Yeah.
the most part, these rewards will just come. They'll come naturally. Worry about 5-star, 3-starring things when you can. And when you can't, worry about just pushing up as far as you can possibly go. I mean, my dwarves, I
Yeah.
might be able to push to 11 now. I've only got the 2 dwarves, but I've got Phylgia, who does decent damage, and she's right
Mhm.
now my sparring pit, which is why she's not available. And I've got a 6-star Geo, and 6-star Geo carries pretty hard. And if the 2 of them can't do it, I'll go back to stage 11 and just farm stage 11. But you farm up,
Yeah.
get as high as you can on manual. If you don't want to farm on manual, drop back down a little bit to film the rest of them on auto, but make sure you use all your 18 keys every day. And that does mean you need to be doing tag every day as well, which is one, unfortunate probably. But
Yeah.
even if all you're doing in tag 1 is having no defense of any kind whatsoever, just put in a couple of bad champions, one in each section, and go in there and run the fights. And if you don't even want to win them, that's fine. But those 6 extra faction war keys are a ton of extra resources for you.
Yeah. And you said on the video on my channel, you were right about to get Morag as well, so that'll be helpful for that
Oh yeah,
faction crypt as well.
yeah. And then just looking at different factions we've got here. Sometimes terrible epics are still good for some of this stuff too. We're talking
Yes.
about your dark elves. My dark elves are absolutely terrible, and I've got a ton of epics. Fang Cleric, not a particularly great. He's probably the worst reviver out of, well, I guess there's only 2 revivers in that faction. He's usable though, so I've got some
Yeah.
gear on him. In fact, I use
Yeah.
him in arena because he's actually got a speed lead. So I use him in tag for this 15% speed lead occasionally
Nice.
because it's, he doesn't have enough gear to ever be effective in combat, but that speed lead's actually worth it for early game. I like Spider as a usable champion. The big problem is he's usable once you invest in him, and without investing in him, he's kind of rough. And Warden, you could argue that he's one of the worst epics in the game, but
He's
he's an epic.
bad, but yeah, he's fine.
So, and then yeah,
I
it's
love.
basically whatever food I have for food, and then 3-starring stuff as well.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the tips that I think is actually really important as well. We were talking about the rare quest. It's nice to
Yeah.
always make sure you have a champion for another faction. Ideally, you'd like to have a rare for every or almost every. To be fair, you're not going to necessarily get it for always everything. The ones that are more important to grab are your dwarves, your shadowkin, and your sylvan watchers. And that's because your dwarves, your shadowkin, your silver watchers, you cannot farm from campaign a rare or even an uncommon.
Yeah.
So I have missed using shadowkin a couple times because I have fed all my shadowkin rares early on in the frenzy for things. And right now I have 2 uncommons. They only have 2 of them. They're really bad, but I have them both at 4 stars with gear on because that's how much investment I had to have to make sure I could at least get 1 star on the first floor in Shadowkin.
Yeah, that's a pretty important one. That's one thing that I've missed out as well. I didn't realize that. I That's something that I learned in this free to play
Mm-hmm.
competition myself. So that's an excellent point. I think it's super important.
Actually, speaking on that, what any of the rares that you would think of? I've already mentioned Diabolist is a really good rare for the demon spawn. Any other rares that you would actually recommend grabbing if you happen to pull one for Faction Wars?
I like the Executioner.
Yep.
You need him for the Justicar fusion, right?
Hmm.
But also, he's reasonable. He's a reasonable champion. He has that AoE. Like his kit is not bad. And Knights Rev can be a very challenging faction, but if you got that Rector Drath at some point, like he can do reasonable amount of damage. So I'm planning on farming a second one to go alongside my what with that the new epic reviver.
Oh, Melketh or no, Sabbatha. Yeah.
Yeah, Sabbatha. Yeah, Sabbatha.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, I
like
agree with
him.
him. I like him. He actually used to be way back in the day. He was considered one of the better rares in the game at one point in
Yeah.
time. Things have certainly changed from that point. He's a defense-based champion that does damage based on attack and defense, so he's a little weird, old school that way. But you
Yeah.
could build him super tanky. He's got this counterattack with increased defense. Honestly, if you can get him in lifesteal gear, he can keep himself kind of alive for a while too. So that's not a
Oh,
bad way
good
to
call.
build
Good
him early
call.
on.
I think
Uh,
lifesteal gear is just in general, if you have extra laying around, that would probably be my go-to for these random faction war champions. Same thing with the Doom Tower set, or Guardian, or the Eternal Dragon one. Like any of these sets that help you gain your HP back, that's really good on
mhm.
your faction war champions.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then yeah, you're gonna mention the barbarians. Yeah,
Yeah.
good,
War
good.
Maiden is really good. Ox is, or Berserker, I should say, is kind of
He's
underrated
not
as
bad.
well.
Yeah.
Decent damage dealer as well. So both of these guys can be very helpful early on. And of course, Shield Guard is also that's Outrider. Is it Shield Guard farmable? Maybe he's not.
No, I don't think so.
And we appear to have technical difficulties. Oh, there it is. Yes,
Uh,
he is. There he
oh,
is.
he is. Oh, perfect.
All right, other factions.
For
Not
me,
every
I
faction has a
don't
good
think
one.
there's any other one. Maybe like the Lizardman one. He's not bad.
No, Skullsworn's not that great.
I've used
He's
him a
got
bunch, but
Yeah, well, he's got all he's got is this increased speed and counterattack on himself, and then an A1.
yeah.
So just not particularly exciting. Does give you a speed and faction crypts aura, so it doesn't suck for that.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you said that. I think that that's a really important thing that people overlook. I get harassed sometimes on stream when I don't use an aura, but
Mhm.
it's like the aura sometimes is important and sometimes it's not. Like if you don't have a good one in your team, sometimes that's okay. But thinking about the aura is important. You need
Yeah.
to just decide what's best for each team. If you can find an aura, that's going to help you. So in all battles, or there are some faction war auras that are pretty powerful, and thinking about that in terms of your team, I think can just give you a boost that you weren't expecting.
Hmm. Yeah, I think Spiritos is worth calling out as somebody who could be helpful early on. She's a support. She's not great, but she's actually really good for the AoE cleanse with block debuffs. That can be helpful in a couple of the faction wars challenges early, particularly against some of the bosses. And this is obviously a very clutch skill against the Nether Spider as well. So there's reasons to have her beyond just faction wars as well. Um, Yes, Graybeard is tolerable because he does have an AoE and it is freeze. Not a great endgame champion. But again, here's the other thing too with some of these champions. We're talking about champions you might build up to 4 stars. You might eventually
Right.
get them to 40. And at some point in time, they will no longer be needed for you, and you can use them as chickens later
Right.
on. But having them at, even if all you do is you have them at 3 stars very early on, so you can 1 or 2 star or 1 star like floor 1 or floor 2. And honestly, the stat requirements to get to floor 3 are not that high. If you've
Mhm.
got 2 champions with okayish gear and an AoE or 2, you can get through floor 3. It's really not that hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You
finally, the
know,
other one I think is really good is I think Eris has got a good place because she does have the cleanse with the increased speed. She can be
okay.
very helpful. Now this needs to be booked, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Then the ally speed aura is not great, but she hits okay. She gets an extra turn if she kills somebody, and she'll randomly attack otherwise. So she doesn't have an AoE per se, but she has basically, she'll get 2 hits per turn instead of 1, which makes her just a little bit better than some rares.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of the Eris, so that's a
Mm-hmm.
good reminder for me. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about in this collab is the new things. Like since we've beaten faction wars, now we have blessings.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about blessings in terms of faction wars and what strategies we can use there?
Well, the good news is that a blessing on a champion can be a huge, huge bonus. So I happen to have a Galek. As you saw, I have really good orc. I had a couple good orc epics, but they were mostly supports. And I
Hmm.
pulled a Galek, and then I pulled a 4-star soul for him. And it made it very easy to say, all right, Galek's going to 4 stars, so I can throw the soul on him. Because that's honestly almost as much stats as I'm getting from the gear I've thrown on him.
Right. Yeah.
So
So
that is
you
how
think that
important.
sometimes in your faction war team you use specific champions just because you have a blessing for them?
Maybe it probably very early on, there's a good chance I would, but at the same time, if I go into the Altar of Souls, for example, and look at my soul collection here, Soulbound Boyer is a good rare. I know she's a good rare. I'm going to keep the soul until I get one. Fleshmonger is a usable rare early on, so I'm going to keep this soul until I get one. I have no idea if Twin Claw is usable. I don't think he's particularly good. This is a 5-star soul. This actually may not be usable because I may not ever want to take a Twin Claw to 5 stars. So this may end up
Yeah.
being food at some point in time. But a Rough Stone, usable early on because if I remember right, he's all AoEs. So from that perspective, he can be nice early on. And having a 1-star soul on him gives him enough extra HP to do some cool stuff. So some of these things are a 1 or a 2-star soul. I may hold on to it for a bit and say, if I happen to pull that rare and it's in a faction where I'm struggling, yeah, it might pop on that champion and suddenly that rare is in my factions until further notice. And it's not like I get a lot from selling this anyway. So it's not
Right.
like it's
Right.
that worse of a return on investment.
And I think if you get good use out of that, then even sacrificing a champion with a blessing as a chicken like that lizardman, I don't think
Mhm.
that that's a big deal. Like you could definitely do that.
Yeah.
And then so like what kind of blessings do you think are important that we would use on our faction war teams?
Well,
Brimstone?
yeah,
Yeah.
Brimstone would be absolutely amazing. Now let's go with the rares because that's really kind of what we're talking about, though.
Hmm.
Phantom Touch is the obvious easy one. If they're an attack-based champion, they want to do damage. This is extra damage straight up. That's certainly very helpful. Miracle Heal doesn't do much for most people because it's restoring max HP, and max HP drop is not something you really deal with. Um, Maybe Indomitable Spirit gives you a random chance. It's just not great though. So if you're really desperate, you could certainly do worse, especially on a champion that's not going to be doing much damage. But I think the extra damage from Phantom Touch is worth it more than the 5% chance to not get stunned, for example.
Right, right.
Um, Faultless Defense could be interesting if they actually put increased defense up. It doesn't have to be the big version either. So this is a damage reflected back on the attacker. So not necessarily the greatest thing, but it's a way to do damage, and it's a way to do damage that's better for a champion that's throwing increased defense up in most cases anyway.
Yeah.
Hero Soul, probably not particularly exciting. Do you have anything particular before I go through the other ones here? Because
No, I like him. I like emergency heal.
Emergency Heal's good
If
if you,
you're,
especially if you
yeah,
have shields or you have a blood shield ring you throw on somebody.
or a shield
Uh,
set.
you know, actually, Survival Instinct isn't horrible early on. 5% turn meter whenever you get debuffed. Taking turns is a problem, so if you're going to get debuffed, especially versus the bosses, that might be a ton of extra turn meter.
Yeah,
Not great normally, but good there. Nourish is actually one I really like on anyone that does continuous heals. I actually put this on some legendaries. It's actually pretty good.
hmm,
It's not. It doesn't look like it's huge, but 5% extra healing from continuous heals is still free healing, so
yeah.
that's good. And then Nature's Bounty is probably the end all be all for rare debuffers. Because getting your stuff from the small to the big versions is kind of huge. In
I
fact,
think
have
there
you
are a
ever thought
couple
about like
niche
Nature's
ones there.
Bounty on like a kale, for example, because he does all those
Yeah.
A1 poisons?
That's true. That's true. I like Nature's Bounty and Phantom Touch, I think, the best for the rares. I
Mhm.
think those are going to be the most common ones that you end up using. When in doubt, put Phantom Touch on them is my thought process. But that Nature's Bounty one can be really clutch with some of your rares in order to make them into a more powerful version.
Yeah. And obviously, if you have an epic, somebody with cruelty is good, especially if
Yes,
they have an AoE. They do need to have at least one AoE for cruelty to really be super useful in most cases.
agreed.
But otherwise, cruelty is really good. Otherwise, it still may end up being actually, I can't define it. Phantom Touch
Phantom
may
Touch.
still be the
Yeah,
best for a lot of those epics.
I agree. I
Maybe
totally agree.
commanding presence.
Yeah, yeah. I like having at least one champion with cruelty, if possible, in all of your faction war teams, because
Yeah,
that's just going to make it so much easier to kill the waves.
exactly. Maybe Heaven Cast on a damage dealer if you've got a buff heavy team, I can sort
Right.
of see as well over.
Yeah.
Because to be fair, Heaven's Cast is guaranteed damage buff when they're buffed versus chance of damage here. So, kind of
Right.
hit or miss.
Right. Yeah. And then the other thing that I was curious about your thoughts on, we just got relics in the game.
Ooh.
But where do you think that comes into play with our faction war teams?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily put a relic on somebody just for faction wars, but that really depends on how many of them you have. And this is one of the things that obviously early on we're kind of, it's just, in fact, let's go and see my collection of what I've got here. So I've got, what, 9 of these things total? So I don't
Oh,
have enough.
dude, you got the cat's
Yes,
gaze?
I forged
Oh,
that on I believe it was on a rare. So
I
I got
don't think I'm gonna
absolutely,
get there
it
in
is.
the Titan event. I
Oh,
don't
I
think I'm
know
gonna
I'm
get
not going to.
there.
I knew I wasn't going to ahead of time, and I gave up on that pretty early because I wanted to focus on champion training. But yeah, I got
Yeah,
the cat's gaze. It's on Alice. That's why I've got Helm Smasher on her.
that's sick.
And yeah, she smacks. It's absolutely amazing. But she, just looking at these here, these are on my champions that I'm using the most. And some of
Yeah,
these champions have kind of fallen off a little bit. Like Flannan, I thought I was going to use a ton, and I am using him a lot in a couple of situations, but he's not on every team like I thought he was going to be early on. But he still gets a good relic that caters to what skills he does. I don't have anyone that really fights with this one yet, but I can tell you right now, the next champion I know that needs some HP is getting this relic just for the extra HP. And from a faction war standpoint, we get enough of this star stuff that maybe moving him around occasionally just to get a few of the extra stars or finish something. Particularly, to be fair, one of the final things I think I do want to mention in this too, and that probably goes into the relics and what you're building for. One of the biggest challenges early on, in addition to the have a rare, is to the beat a boss. And like the first time I've ever missed an advanced quest was yesterday, and I missed the beat a boss
yeah, me
because
too.
I just couldn't get through to a boss. And it was an Ogren where I had a 5-star Ugo and a couple
Right.
of epics, but it just wasn't enough because the boss, and that boss is absolutely absurd. That's the ally attack boss, and that's
Yeah.
just if you can't get decrease
Ignores your
attack up, you're
defense.
dead.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it is so rough to get through these things reliably, and that's actually where I would be willing to move relics around, because if I'm just this close to making it through a boss fight, well, if I can get an extra 2000 HP by moving a relic around or do
Yes.
an extra 5% ignore defense, yeah, then
Yeah.
maybe that relic gets moved around and then gets put back later on. That's definitely worth it. And it's worth keeping in mind. You want to figure out how to beat a boss on as many of those factions as you can as early as possible so you don't get caught with that.
Right. And I think later on, once a lot of these newer accounts are getting to the final stage in the faction, like that level 21,
Hmm.
I think it's perfectly fine to move relics onto the whole team because that's going to just give you a bunch of extra stats, bunch of extra abilities, and it's going to make that faction that much easier to beat.
Yeah, agreed. It's one of these things that we say this about dungeons too, but a lot of the faction war stages you only need to beat once. And ideally, if you can 3-star them at the same time, you literally only need to beat them once, and then you'll
Right.
never go back to them ever again. It doesn't
Exactly.
make a lot of sense to use a ton of keys on a particular floor trying to get it to that 6-star or that 3-star. If you realize, oh, this run's failed, you stop it and start over again if you're grinding a floor that you don't actually want to farm for the rewards.
Yeah.
And if you're
Yeah.
farming a floor for the rewards, you don't care if you're getting a 1-star. As long as you're passing it, it's fine.
Yeah.
So any final
Well,
tips?
any final tips? I think effort is the most important
Mhm.
tip. Think about what you want to do with your teams, your champions. Have a plan, build the team, put gear on them, but just put effort into the teams because it's easy, awesome rewards. Lydia is freaking essential for every account. It's so important for your account. And I think that idea of just like let's put some effort into the teams will take you a long way.
Yeah. And I mean, you look here, and I don't have all this gear equipped at the moment, and it's just because I haven't had the champions or the silver to invest in putting this on
Right.
champions. But you'll
Yep.
see I have perception on an awful lot of my champions. And that is because, I don't necessarily have him doing a lot of debuffs because he has a provoke, which I wasn't worried about. But this is extra speed. Every 2 pieces is 5% extra speed. So it's like every
Right.
2 pieces combo have a bonus 5 speed. Speed is one of the best things that you can do for a faction wars team because every time you can take 2 turns to the enemy's 1, that's 2 enemies you can try to kill before one of them attacks you.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
So, yep, just
Well,
quick.
man, I think we covered a lot of faction war topics today that no one's really talking about. And hopefully everybody goes and hits the like button. Tell us what we missed though. Like what are the things that you still have questions on? Hit Braun up in the comments down here. I'll try to take a look too. See what's going on down there. But man, thank you so much for having me here. This was a really fun discussion about faction wars and all of the new stuff that they've added in the game.
Yeah, and it's just again, it's kind of fun. I mean, I'm reveling in this, and I'm sure you are too. Is the fact to challenge faction wars one more time, and much like every account plays a little bit different, but there's now new wrinkles in it as well. There are things that are new even to us going up through
Right.
faction wars. We've both got some faction wars guides that are out there. Go check his out. His are still relevant even if they're a couple years old. I've got some newer ones as well. There's a lot of great content out there on faction wars, but you can see even by now relics weren't a thing, blessings weren't as much of a thing. There's just all kinds of new stuff that's in there that makes it a little bit easier for you to do your faction wars, but at the same time the rewards are just worth going for. So appreciate you
Yes.
having on. Go like and subscribe to his channel if you have not already. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. I really appreciate you guys are absolutely awesome. Much love from the two of us. Take care. He's MTG Jedi and I am Bront CatHerder.
See you later. Thank you.